Hey investors, welcome back to Stoxpot, your go-to podcast to unpack what's happening around various stocks, industries and economy. It's me LEKSHMANmj, and today we are exploring a fascinating story about China's manufacturing industry, a powerhouse that once ruled the world but now faces challenges like never before. Have you ever wondered how a country that produced over 70% of the world's footwear just a decade ago is now grappling with shrinking demand, rising wages and fierce competition? What happens when an economic giant begins to lose its competitive edge? And what does this mean for millions of workers who depend on these factories for their livelihoods? Stay tuned as we unpack the story step by step. Let's start with a simple fact. China was once the king of low-cost manufacturing. Its factories churned out everything from shoes to electronics at prices that no one could beat. But today, things are changing fast because the same forces that made China successful, that is, their cheap labor and efficient supply chains, are no longer working in its favor. Let's break it down. Back in early 2000s, China became the go-to destination for companies looking to produce goods cheaply. Factories that are spread across various provinces were employing millions of people. For example, a shoe factory employed more than 100 workers during China's boom years. Those were the days when wages were low and supply chains were tightly packed together, making production incredibly efficient. But over the past decade, three major factors have eaten away China's dominance. Rising wages in manufacturing hubs, intense competition from countries like Vietnam and Indonesia, and a trade war with US which resulted in tariffs and reduced orders. As a result, the shoe factory that I mentioned just before now employs fewer than 20 workers. The factory management says the future is bleak if we continue like this. It's not just the view of one factory. The sentiment echoes across countless small factories in China. With that said, now let's see why did wages rise. As China grew richer and as living standards improved, so did the workers' expectation too. Meanwhile, neighboring countries like Vietnam and Indonesia offer cheaper alternatives, attracting businesses away from China. By 2018, China's share of global footwear exports had dropped by 10%. So what's the solution? Many factories are turning to automation. Machines can do repetitive tasks faster and cheaper than humans. For instance, in a car plant, robots handle tasks like welding and fitting windscreens. The goal is to reduce the human workforce by 10% every year. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the catch. Automation creates fewer jobs overall. While high-tech factories struggle to find young and skilled workers, on the other side, older and unskilled workers face unemployment. Often, these workers don't qualify for jobs in advanced industries. In fact, researchers found that between 2011 and 2019, employment in 12 labor-intensive industries fell by 14% or nearly 4 million roles. Textile jobs alone shrank by 40%. So now let's see, why are younger workers reluctant to join factories? Because they see factory workers dirty, hard and tiring. With better education levels, they prefer office jobs or service sector roles. Now looking on to social impacts, unemployment among low-skilled workers is not just an economic issue, it's a social one. When too many workers are squeezed out of upgraded industries, their wages stagnate or fall. This leads to lower consumption spending, hampering economic growth. The worst case effect is it can even spark protests and unrest in the country. In the recent years, labor protests have surged in China. Last year saw 452 protests in manufacturing sector, the highest number in almost a decade. Most were due to factory closures, relocations or unpaid wages. Even high-tech sectors are not immune. Intense competition in industries like electric vehicles has triggered price wars and layoffs. While the government tries to support traditional industries through initiatives like smart manufacturing bases, not all factories can afford expensive upgrades. China's leaders know that they need to act. Hence, they are focusing on advanced manufacturing rather than relying solely on cheap labor. But will this be enough is the question at the moment. On one hand, automation and robotics could help address labor shortages and keep China competitive globally. On the other hand, displaced workers may struggle to adapt unless proper training programs are implemented. So looking ahead, experts believe that China must strike a balance. It needs to invest in high-tech industries while ensuring that millions of low-skilled workers are not left behind. But whether this is possible remains uncertain, especially given the country's rapidly aging population and shrinking workforce. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. We have seen how China's manufacturing industry is undergoing profound changes, from rising wages and automation to social unrest and government intervention. The stakes are high. Will China manage to reinvent itself yet again? Drop your valuable opinions in the comments down. And thanks for tuning into Stoxpot. If you find this episode insightful, make sure you follow and share this with your friends. Until next time, it's LEKSHMANmj signing off.